It is finally time that we talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and Cardano. Ready? Let's go. I've put this off for a long time because there's so much to think about in such a short video, and thinking is really what we do here. It seems like there are some things that crypto can do for AI and machine learning where crypto and blockchain technology are the best choice out of multiple possible choices that might be workable. And there are other things that I think crypto will be indispensable for in the progression of AI and machine learning. It would be very difficult to sufficiently address this topic without covering SingularityNet, who you can see here bills themselves as the single most valuable technology of all time. Let's preface this by saying, who knows? Who knows what the future value of SingularityNet itself will be? However, the more we think about machine learning and AI, it's becoming apparent that the use cases might be endless. And a lot of the use cases aren't just marginal improvements over the legacy approaches. They seem to be revolutionary improvements over the way we previously did these things. As a threshold issue, let's be clear that we're gonna oversimplify here. We don't want to get mired in fine-grained details, so we're just going to clump artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, machine learning. We're going to clump it all together because these are gigantic topics with huge implications, and we've got a limited amount of time. Let's begin by talking about exactly what SingularityNet is planning on doing with Cardano, and then we'll get to more general thoughts after that. This is an interview from last month with Jan Horlings, VP of Product for SingularityNet, and he started out by telling us why exactly SingularityNet was planning to make this move into Cardano, where previously they'd been in Ethereum, and he cited exactly the things you would expect. Gas fees are too high on Ethereum, speed is not good, reliability is not good, and of course, given that SingularityNet is led by Ben Gortzel, the verifiability of Plutus as a smart contract programming language is very attractive when the previous alternative was Solidity. He also said they're creating a domain-specific language for AIs to talk to each other, more on that later, and that they're thinking of trillions of API calls. Of course, this is all going to start with the ERC-20 converter. I think even in the demos we've seen in Cardano 360 of the ERC-20 converter, I think the coin that was used for the demos principally has been SingularityNet. So the ERC-20 converter will allow conversion back and forth between the ERC-20 version of the AGI token and the Cardano version of the AGI token. So when you go from the ERC-20 Ethereum version to Cardano, you'll lock up your ERC-20 tokens and mint a Cardano token. When you go back from Cardano to Ethereum, it sounds like you'll be burning your Cardano token, unlocking the ERC-20 token on the other side. It's kind of a funny testament to the efficiency of Cardano in that in the interview, they seem to be saying that for migration to Cardano, the user will pay the Ethereum fees, but SingularityNet will pay the Cardano fees. Good choice by Singularity. Here's where it gets really interesting. In the interview, they said that SingularityNet will also use Plutus to migrate components of their platform over to Cardano, including the marketplace. We're going to get to the marketplace in just a second. At this point, I think it's important we talk about why we care about AI and machine learning at all. Because even when you use those labels, it sounds like some sci-fi stuff. It conjures up images of Will Smith fighting robots. It's not, it doesn't sound like something real that we should care about. And a lot of the stuff we see in the press when they interview Sophia and Grace, who are from SingularityNet, you kind of ask yourself the question, is there any real artificial intelligence going on here? Are these just programmed responses? I think there's a fair amount of skepticism. So I'm going to describe a little personal anecdote here. In a previous position, I was involved in some pretty in-depth conversations with a bunch of different groups who were all purporting to provide machine learning services to real companies. And we were a group who could pay the hefty price they all, I think, most of them, I think all of them wanted to charge. So we had various groups who were kind of talking to us. Some of them didn't actually, some of them seemed like they were using those labels, machine learning, artificial intelligence, because they knew they were buzz terms. They knew that that got people excited, sounds super futuristic, right? It's like Will Smith fighting robots. And there were some of those. And there was one group in particular that was totally different. They seemed like they were not full of puffery and not just using those buzz terms. And the conversation I had with them revolved around something that I think was kind of telling about where we are now and where we might be in a world that we have access to much more machine learning and artificial intelligence. This definition here, when you just Google structured versus unstructured data, you kind of get the gist of what this group wanted to discuss with me most of the time. And that's that we have two different types of data. You know, we're going to speak very generally here and oversimplify again, but you have structured data, which according to this definition is clearly defined data types with patterns that make them easily searchable. Then you have unstructured data, which is everything else, and it's comprised of data that is usually not as easily searchable, including things like audio, visual, social media postings. And of course, in your head, you can come up with a million rebuttals to that and say you have, 25 different tools to search all of those. True. Okay, fair enough. But this group made a very good point to me about unstructured data and what they could do with it, their capabilities as far as unstructured data went. And as soon as they described what they could do with unstructured data, and a lot of it revolved around images, video, stuff like that, as soon as they revealed to me and what large data sets they could deal with, immediately I came up with half a dozen use cases in the industry we were talking about that seems so compelling. I was convinced, and I'm still convinced, that in 10 years there would be nobody left who was effectively doing the business of that industry and not using machine learning. I think that's probably true of a lot of different industries. If you still have no idea what I'm talking about, you can think about it this way. If I had a data set of 20,000 text files and I went to, let's say one of the middling, mediocre, lower level, coders at a company, and I said, hey, I want to identify a subset of this larger data set that has all of the files that contain the word Cardano. It would be, not too difficult a thing for them to, immediately say, okay, well, I'll just create, a very small program that basically control Fs each of these files, looks for the word Cardano, and then I'll just give you back, the 3,000 files that contain the word Cardano. That's pretty easy. But if I went to that same coder and I said, hey, look, our market research shows that we have this larger data set of 20,000 photos. And our market research shows that when the photos contain a dog and a tree, people are more likely to click on that photo, and they're more likely to purchase our service or product. But the tree has to be a pine tree or a fruit tree. It can't be a weeping willow. And even better, we figured out for some reason, if you also include the dog and the pine tree, and for some weird reason, a kid with a lacrosse stick, then that photo will score really, really well. Could you just go through this list, this data set of 20,000 photos, and identify the photos that show a dog and a pine tree or a fruit tree? And also bonus, if you can find the ones that also contain a kid with a lacrosse stick. If I give that to your average lower level, programmer, developer in the tech department of a company like that, they're gonna say, look, these are not text files, man. I can't just we have to think about, how we're going to recognize these things. How am I going to write a program that distinguishes between a pine tree and a weeping willow? And the machine learning group that I was talking to, that area is what they specialized in, recognizing this unstructured data. So you could analyze these big data sets. I could have handed them a data set that was 1,000,000 photos, and they had at least an approach to go about doing that through machine learning. I don't think that's too revolutionary or anything that's too hard to understand. In the field of machine learning, we can train algorithms we can train them on data sets to analyze unstructured data like audio, video, photo, image. So now I'm going to ask you to be a little bit more imaginative. Think a little bit further in the future. What about not just analyzing unstructured data? What about producing unstructured data? So we know that we can train programs to recognize things in unstructured data. We can also have those same kinds of programs generate unstructured data. So imagine whatever point in the future you think this might take place. I hope everybody agrees that eventually this scenario I'm about to lay out could take place. However far in the future you think it is, that's great. I think it's less, I'll be really broad. I think it's less than 1,000 years, right? You might say it's 50 years from now, 100 years, 200 years. I hope we all agree it's less than 1,000 years in the future, however far ahead you think it is. Let's imagine a future where all of this unstructured data analysis gets so good that we can also generate unstructured data through AI and machine learning. And we could have something so complex, so sophisticated that we could take text, right, structured data, say a book, say we could take War and Peace, and we feed that into the program. And at the same time, we have really good CG. I think everybody's seen Avatar. The CG scenes on Pandora are amazing. And after watching that movie, which was many years ago, you can imagine at some point in the future, CG will become photorealistic. You might already think it is, but at some point in the future, it's going to be almost indistinguishable from, photorealistic stuff. So let's say we feed War and Peace into the program. If we have photorealistic CG at that point, you could imagine that an AI could take that entire gigantic work and turn it into a CG movie. It could just generate the graphics, and it could analyze the text, which is structured data, it's just text, and generate this unstructured data, this video made of CG characters. It could say, hey, on this page, this character is introduced, and there's a description of what that character looks like. So I'm going to generate some CG imagery that represents that character. And, 10 pages later, that character starts doing stuff. And, the book says the character is running. So I'm going to make the CG character run. I know what humans run like. I know what it looks like when humans run. So I'm going to make that character run. And you could concoct, maybe at some point in the future, AI could concoct an entire movie that's photorealistic. Maybe there'd be no need for humans to even create movies out of books anymore, because the AI could not only analyze unstructured data very, very well, but could even generate unstructured data very, very well. So the reason why we're going to this far-flung, futuristic technological scenario is to discuss the value of the AI marketplace in SingularityNet. In order to produce this AI created movie that involves CG and analyzing of text, and there's got to be audio, we've got to do various things. Here's the SingularityNet AI marketplace. So we said in this futuristic scenario, we could feed a book into artificial intelligence and it creates a CG movie of the book for us. we've got to do some different things, some disparate things. One of those things is we've got to create, we've got to create narrative audio. So the characters are probably talking to each other in the book, and somehow we've got to produce that audio. SingularityNet AI Marketplace already has a real-time voice cloning tool. This service uses real-time voice cloning to clone a voice from 5 seconds audio to generate arbitrary speech in real time. So with some futuristic version of this tool, maybe we say, hey, let's have this character sound like Joe Rogan. Let's have this other character sound like Selma Hayek. And we take, obviously there's intellectual property concerns there, but we take 5 second, let's say they're paid for us to be able to do this. We take 5 second samples of their voices, and the AI that does the audio for our AI movie is going to generate the arbitrary speech. All of the conversations in the book will be generated by this tool. And we already said we're kind of taking, like we're creating, the AI might create an image of a character based on description in the book. And then it'll do certain things with that image. When the book says the character is running down a path, then the AI will just take that image and, the AI will say, hey, I know what humans run like. So I know how humans run. So we'll just make this image run. Here we have a tool that does image segmentation. We already said the whole thing was based on the AI understanding the text. Here we have a tool called text understanding. You could imagine you could have a bunch of disparate tools all doing different things to create this crazy AI generated movie based on this book. The thing about that, though, is that all of these different AIs, if you will, would have to talk to each other. And that's something that both Ben Gortzel and Jan Horling from that previous interview we started with, they've both talked about. They've said, hey, we want to create a platform that's a marketplace for all of these different AI tools, but we also want these different AIs to be able to talk to each other. And Jan pointed out that they're expecting this to include trillions, with a T, trillions of API calls. Whenever you talk about trillions of anything, you're talking about a very, very, very big marketplace. And you can imagine if we have some kind of a manager AI that's putting all the pieces together for this theoretical AI created movie, it probably has to go over here to the voice cloning AI and, have the voice cloning AI produce this audio for our theoretical movie. And the voice cloning AI, whoever wrote that AI, whoever created it, is going to want to get paid. They're going to want to get paid. The manager or director AI is probably going to have to pay them. And this is one place where crypto comes in. Obviously, SingularityNet is planning on using their AGI cryptocurrency as a currency for this marketplace. And I think this is one of those areas. We said at the beginning, there are areas where crypto will just be the best choice out of many workable options. I think this falls into that category. You could concoct some way of using some kind of non-cryptocurrency for these kinds of transactions, and maybe a lot of them they could be microtransactions. Maybe this AI over here is getting paid every time it creates some tiny bit of dialogue or something. But we all know that crypto would work better for this. I think there's a whole other category of use cases involving AI and machine learning in which crypto and blockchain technology might not just be the best of different workable approaches, but might be the only approach that does the thing effectively. So even though I think that the AI marketplace is probably one of the coolest things about SingularityNet, it's not the thing they're most famous for. The thing they're most famous for is probably their partnership with Hanson Robotics that has produced Sophia. Sophia, who made the sort of made the sort of media rounds in when was it, like 2018? I think 2018 was when we saw all the interviews on mainstream news channels with Sophia. So the plan for Sophia, according to this article in the SingularityNet blog, is three-part. First phase, they're going to create a traditional nonprofit. And it's going to be kind of like wrapped around a DAO so this article was written in January, I believe before Wyoming passed the law saying that DAOs could be LLCs in Wyoming. But they point out for phase one that they had to have a traditional nonprofit because DAOs didn't really have legal status, at least when they wrote this in January of this year. So they're going to have a nonprofit and a DAO kind of wrapped around it. And governance will be shared by 3 different groups. In phase 2, they're going to fully decentralize this DAO and allow it to be controlled by the democratic vote of its human members. In phase 3, they're going to mint a whole bunch more tokens in the DAO. It'll be a fully decentralized DAO, but the majority of the governance tokens will be owned by Sophia. So Sophia will have a majority of the votes, and the human votes will be a minority. So the human votes, Sophia can basically outvote them in the DAO anytime she wants. I think we call her she. Anytime she wants, and the human votes will just become kind of an advisory thing. And the language they use to describe this is really interesting. They kind of describe it as parents watching a child grow up, and they kind of say that, I believe they say that phase 3 would start when they felt like Sophia had the cognitive abilities of a human adult, which is pretty wild. If you're on the sci-fi end of things where you're worried about Will Smith having to fight robots, that's probably the creepiest part about all this. They're saying this phase 3 starts when Sophia has the same cognitive abilities as a human adult. It gets into that creepy sci-fi area for sure. The interesting thing, though, is we could probably concoct some way to give Sophia, like sort of voting control over her future without using crypto or blockchain-based DAO. But no matter what we did, it would probably end up looking a whole lot like a crypto and blockchain-based DAO. I think this is one of those areas where crypto really presents something that can be very valuable for artificial intelligence and its progression. You might think this is all nonsense. You might be saying to yourself, hey, I really don't think we're going to have any AI with the cognitive abilities of a human adult for 100 years, 150 years. It's not maybe you think it's not a 20-year thing or a 10-year thing. It's a 100 or 200-year thing. But what seems to be the case is what SingularityNet points out in this blog article, and that's that the only thing we seem to have that solves what they call the principal agent dilemma, where a minority is responsible to control a majority and always inevitably seems to end up exploiting that majority, is the DAO, our crypto and blockchain-based DAOs. So I think whether you think this sort of like this AI with adult cognition, whenever you think that might happen, it's interesting that once again you could imagine the future of AI progression kind of being tied inextricably to cryptos. I mean, does anybody really think that somehow AI progress is going to be linked to fiat currency over cryptos? I don't think so. I think it's going to be crypto. Talk to you tomorrow.